After a long wait, Marvel's Phase 4 is officially kicked off by the arrival of the much-awaited Black Widow movie. And I watched it, and it was meh. Directed by Kate Shortland, Black Widow opens up in 1995 with the young Natasha Romanoff and Yelena Belova living undercover as a Midwestern family, along with Melina Vostokov, played by Rachel Weisz, and Alexei Shostakov, played by David Harbour, working for the Red Room. The family's activities are discovered and they're pursued by S.H.I.E.L.D., but they make their escape to Cuba before Natasha and Yelena are separated and return to the Red Room. The rest of Black Widow takes place following the events of Captain America Civil War, finding Natasha on the run from General Ross and the government for violating the Sokovia Accords. When Yelena, now an adult and played by Florence Pugh, is tasked with pursuing a Red Room defector, she's freed from her brainwashing and reaches out to Natasha, who she considered to be like a sister. Meanwhile, Natasha seeks to live a quiet life on the run, hiding out with the help of her associate Mason, played by Oti Fagbenle, to hide out in Norway. After receiving a package of the antidote that undoes the Widow's brainwashing and tangling with Taskmaster, Natasha and Yelena meet up, starting on a mission to defeat a ghost from Natasha's past, Dreykov, played by Ray Winstone. The two of them reunite their manufactured family from years before to take down the Red Room and free the remaining widows. And so yeah, typical Marvel spy movie fare, but therein lies the problem. It's just typical. Black Widow is a showcase of Marvel's favorite tropes without adding anything or doing anything unique. The most daring the movie gets, I feel, is the opening credit sequence, a cover of Nirvana Smells Like Teen Spirit set to a montage of the Red Room's indoctrination process. But Black Widow feels very by the numbers, which is disappointing following more daring outings on the TV sphere and news about upcoming movies like The Eternals, Shang-Chi and the Legend of the Ten Rings, and Doctor Strange and the Multiverse of Madness. So spoilers, obviously, but this is my semi-review / critique of Marvel's Black Widow, and why it's a showcase of Marvel and its worst tropes. So let's break down what exactly went wrong. Alright, so let's start off with something light. Exploiting the male gaze. For those who don't know, the male gaze is a way of filming that frames the world in a masculine, heterosexual view. It's basically used to titillate men and to objectify women. It's in the way that shots are framed or what gets focused on camera. It's not always intentional, but it's kind of just ingrained in society to the point where we're just used to it and don't notice it unless it's pointed out. Whenever I have to explain the male gaze to someone, I just show them this shot from Transformers 2. Actually, just any Michael Bay movie, to be honest. I'm only really including this point because 1, I was surprised at the gratuitous ScarJo ass shots that were present throughout the first half of the movie. And then 2, throughout the press junket of Black Widow, Scarlett Johansson spoke up about how she felt like Natasha was treated like a piece of meat during her tenure at Marvel, specifically in Iron Man 2, so I just kinda expected different from this movie, especially since the director is a woman. And then 3, because Marvel Executive VP Victoria Alonso literally the other week said that Marvel was, quote, making a conscientious effort to not objectify women, which for me as a female comic book and comic book movie fan was reassuring and refreshing, but then I watched Black Widow and it's just more of the same, so I don't know what that was all about. Marvel's had a pattern of sneaking in shots to cater to the male gaze in their movies, specifically in regards to how female characters are framed and sometimes in how they're dressed. People like Gamora, Scarlet Witch, and most prominently Black Widow. Like, die, but make it pretty. But yeah, just a little caught off guard by how Natasha was framed in her own movie. And to be fair, this is only really a problem in the first half of the movie that I noticed. I applaud the movie for showing a diverse group of widows, and from what I remember, the movie doesn't give them the same treatment later on, but moving on. It was Joss Whedon who said, make it dark, make it grim, make it tough, but then for the love of God, tell a joke. And Marvel has used this as gospel, which has been, I feel, a detriment to their movies, because it deflates dramatic tension and cheapens emotional moments. Black Widow, like so many other Marvel movies, uses comedy to undercut serious moments. There's a scene when Natasha and Yelena break Alexei out of prison where, after asking the girls if they're mad at him because they're on their periods, which, yikes, it's the year of our Lord 2021 and we're still doing these jokes, Yelena in a very deadpan way goes into detail about the forced castration that the girls in the Red Room have to go through. And I mean, I laughed at that part because holy shit, do I like dark comedy and also Florence Pugh's delivery, but I've seen a lot of people complain about this moment online because it is played for laughs. It's different from scenes like earlier when Yelena makes fun of Natasha for posing when she fights because the scene didn't have a serious tone for it to deflate in the first place. Marvel doesn't like us as viewers to sit in any emotion for too long, especially not anything sad. But this bit of theirs seems more noticeable in Black Widow as not all the jokes land well throughout the movie, enough to undercut the dramatic or more serious lines. Next up, let's talk about Natasha as a main character. I've talked about tabula rasa or blank slate characters in my Captain Marvel video, characters who start off without established personalities. As opposed to blank slates, static characters have established personalities but don't change, grow, or learn over the course of the story, and Marvel has their fair share of both. Within the MCU, the best example of a static character is the Star-Spangled Man with the plan himself, Captain America. Throughout his 3 movies, Steve Rogers acts and is the same man he is in every movie, regardless of the conflict. Until we get to Endgame, but I have an upcoming video about that. Every video is upcoming if they're all in various stages of production. Essentially, Steve navigates the plot doesn't navigate him. But in Black Widow, Natasha is basically forced to remain a static character because it's a midquel. Her story has already been finished, at least to us as an audience. So they couldn't really take her character in a different direction or do much with her without it undoing what was established in Infinity War and Endgame. And don't get me wrong, static characters are fine if done well or if given proper motivation. We watch plenty of movies with static characters in them. Best example I can think of is Indiana Jones. It's a common talking point that the plot of Raiders of the Lost Ark would proceed regardless of whether or not Indy got involved. Like the Nazis would have still gotten the Ark of the Covenant, opened it, and melted their faces off whether or not he was there. The issue is that Natasha feels too much like a passive participant in her own movie. There were points in the movie where I felt like Natasha was bothered or felt inconvenienced to be on the mission in the first place. I mean, part of that comes from her annoyance at Alexei and Melina abandoning her, not wanting to accept that their family unit was just an act in the Red Room's eyes, initially not trusting Yelena, etc. But it felt like the movie was trying really hard to make it seem like Natasha really cared about taking down the Red Room, while also sidestepping why, over the course of all the previous Marvel movies, she showed little care or interest in what happened with the other Red Room widows, Yelena included. And her motivations and concerns just didn't feel genuine because we haven't seen her care about all this stuff up until this point. In short, it just didn't feel like Natasha truly wanted anything for herself over the course of the movie. Partway through, she cares about finding her birth mother, but that plot point arises and is just as quickly dashed by Dreykov, and she moves on. It just feels like she's just completing the mission because she had a loose end in regards to Dreykov, as a favor to Yelena. She doesn't even go on to help the widows and the others after the plot wraps up, she just goes on the run again. Like, the plot just kind of happens to Natasha, and it never feels like she has any stakes in what happens. Which, speaking of stakes, the movie doesn't really have stakes. There's a way to make a midquel that still creates believable tension, despite knowing that the characters will make it out okay. After Infinity War came out, I knew Endgame was to follow, or Infinity War 2 as was the style at the time. But still, that didn't stop me from gasping, or crying, when Thanos snapped his fingers and the hero started turning to dust. There was no way everyone wasn't going to come back, but that's called establishing proper stakes, baby! And that's not to say that, like, every MCU movie needs to have world-ending stakes, but we as an audience should still feel like there's something for forfeit, whether it's a character's personal goals not being met, or their morals being tested even if we know they survive in the end. And a lot of the MCU movies with smaller stakes, like Black Widow, end up feeling meandering or inconsequential to the rest of the MCU proper. When they first announced that the Black Widow movie would take place between Civil War and Infinity War, the biggest complaint I kept seeing was that everyone knew she wouldn't be in any real danger because we knew Natasha was going to die later anyway. People make fun of the Fast and Furious movies for having zero tension or stakes because the characters survive so much bullshit, but I felt the same way watching Black Widow. Throughout the movie, I never felt like Natasha was in any real danger because we've seen her deal with a lot worse. The movie doesn't push Natasha past her capabilities, which leads me to my next point. Black Widow feels like a story being told in half measures. And by that, I mean the movie doesn't take its concepts, its characters, its villains, and push them all the way to where they could be. Ideas throughout the movie are raised, but then not paid off. Throughout the movie, Natasha retells what happened between her and Hawkeye in Budapest, as teased in Marvel's The Avengers. Like I said earlier with the stakes feeling low, I feel like if the movie had been set when Natasha and Clint were in Budapest, there would have been more emotional stakes, especially in regards to what Natasha did to Dreykov's daughter, and being forced to live with the repercussions of what she did. Or even the tension that would have come from her defecting from the Red Room, leaving the only life she ever knew behind. We never see Natasha in her prime during those days, only her life post-SHIELD and post-Avengers. Instead, in the movie, we follow a story that follows the aftershocks of that event, and those aftershocks have gone unnoticed by Natasha at least for years. Dreykov, the Widows, and the Red Room were still in operation, even after Natasha thought that she killed him. The story brings up events of Natasha's past, but doesn't fully lean into its effects on her, I feel. Instead, recalling her guilt mostly through exposition like we've seen before. And I don't know if this is just indicative of Jack Schaefer's writing style, and I've already talked at length about WandaVision's villain problem in a separate video, but Dreykov feels like a villain from Phase 1 of Marvel. Like a one-note, knockoff brand Bond villain. He's not threatening as compared to other villains Natasha has faced. They set him up as threatening, but didn't really deliver. But Marvel is no stranger to weak villains. And then they bring up the idea that Natasha wants to know more about her parentage, but Dreykov basically tells her that her mother was a nobody, which, great, this again. And she doesn't follow up or bother pursuing the truth. She just takes them at face value. Hi, this is editing comment with the note, because I just realized it while I was writing, when I was recording. But it could totally be that like Natasha used the parentage thing to just get information out of Dreykov. But it just kind of feels like a Chekhov's gun sort of thing where they brought up an idea of her parentage and stuff. Because I think they bring it up in another scene with like her and Melina. But then they just didn't deliver on it, so I don't know. Like, it could just be like she's just being manipulative or whatever, but at the same time, it's kind of weird that her parentage has been brought up twice now. Like, once in this and then once in Endgame. And then have her just, like, not care about it. But anyway, back to the video. Or like the Red Guardian. It's a running joke that he brags about having fought Captain America despite Cap being frozen in ice the whole time. So when he goes toe-to-toe with Taskmaster, a person who can mimic Cap's fighting style exactly, that would have been a really interesting payoff to see him either win the fight definitively, or to have him lose and face his own delusions head on. But nah, they just trapped Taskmaster in a cell, which... Let's talk about Taskmaster for a second. I talked about it for a bit in my Captain Marvel video, and in my WandaVision video, but Marvel has a weird thing they do where they take characters who are fascinating in the comics, and water them down for the movies or make unnecessary changes. Or in cases like Marvel, change them to make them more progressive, I guess. But the on-screen adaptation of the character pales in comparison to the original. Taskmaster, aka Tony Masters, premiered in Avengers number 195 in 1980. Created by David Michelini and George Perez, he's an ex-SHIELD agent trained in peak human capacity and has photographic reflexes, allowing him to mimic the fighting styles of anyone he sees at the cost of his memory. Like, here's a mini hindsight as 2020, but we've already established that SHIELD dissolved. It would have been interesting to have him end up working with the Red Room, and maybe he and Natasha knew each other during their time with SHIELD or something. Maybe it goes into themes of fleeing from and then having to face your past, when Natasha has to fight a man who literally can't remember his, but still wronged her in some way. And I mean delving more into those themes. Instead we have Dreykov's daughter as Taskmaster, and she's basically a mindless Terminator for most of the movie. Her being alive strips Natasha of any lasting repercussions as a result of the choices she made in Budapest. And it feels like a lazy and contrived reveal. Like, on paper, I get what they were going for, but it's one of those things like with Malekith or Agatha Harkness or Marvel where the source material was gift wrapped for film or TV adaptation, but they changed it in a way that wasn't thematically satisfying. My final point and my final disappointment with Black Widow is that I feel like they took the easy way out and told a safe story. Natasha recounts what happened in Budapest, and like I said earlier, that sounded like a more dynamic and more engaging one than the one we got. Like, Natasha made a morally ambiguous choice in regards to Antonio Dreykov that led to years of guilt. It would have been more interesting to actually see that on screen rather than within a flashback. Even the opening sequence of them living undercover in Ohio was a more interesting concept than what we got. Like, a real The Americans vibe. It felt like instead of telling a story that would have been more out of the box or daring, they told the safe story. The by-the-number story. Marvel recently with the Disney Plus shows has been more adventurous in their storytelling, I feel, at least in regards to WandaVision, Loki, and the upcoming release of What If. Falcon and the Winter Soldier has felt the safest, and more in line with what people come to expect from Marvel, but even then, they at least explored things that haven't been explored in Marvel's main movie outings. The Red Room storylines in the comics don't hold back or pull its punches, but with Black Widow, they dip their toes into the horror of the Red Room in parts, but like I said, half measures. And aside from the opening credit sequence, the movie doesn't delve into the disturbing, almost dystopian Soviet Union era indoctrination of the widows. Which, like, that might be due to it probably not being a good idea in the global movie market to keep doing the Soviet Union bad thing, as to not offend foreign markets, but still. Black Widow has the seedlings of being an amazing Marvel movie, something unique and out of the box in line with Thor Ragnarok or Guardians of the Galaxy, and it just didn't deliver, at least for me. While even the worst Marvel movies have a part to play in the grander MCU, Black Widow just doesn't feel necessary. Like, even Thor the Dark World had lasting impacts in both Avengers Endgame and Loki. The only thing that seems necessary in Black Widow is the introduction of Yelena Belova, and her further impact was only established in a post-credit scene. When people talked about the Marvel machine and how all the movies feel the same and uncreative and don't do anything new, at first I didn't get what they meant, but after watching Black Widow I get it now. This movie is a culmination of all of Marvel's usual shticks. It's not egregiously bad or boring, but Black Widow feels painfully mediocre for one of Marvel's most fascinating characters. The movie feels like it was made more out of obligation than actual interest, where they could have taken Marvel's first prominent female character, given her an interesting, unique story that was nothing like the 12 years worth of Marvel movies that came before. Black Widow could have been a necessary, maybe even shining cog in the grander Marvel machine. But what we got is just the nuts and bolts of something that could have been stellar. But what do you guys think? Have you seen Black Widow? If so, what are your thoughts? Leave your comments down in the pit. Make sure to like, share, and subscribe. And heads up, I was in the middle of working on a totally different video. Well, 2 totally different videos when I decided to make this one, so the references in the next couple of videos may be a little wonky time-wise. But yeah. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you all soonish.